Instawise. Big ideas.
There's a personality trait called openness, which is associated with intellect and creativity. And there are pronounced gender differences in openness, such that men are higher in intellect, which encompasses interest in ideas, and women are higher in aesthetics, which encompasses interest in, well, in art and literature and that sort of thing. And it's partly for that reason that men read more nonfiction and women read more fiction. And I just wanted to point out that there was a natural gender divide that occurred automatically and without compulsion in this particular case, in the case of this debate, and that the more our society enforces its increasingly absurd demands for equity upon everyone, the less likely it is that such natural divisions will be able to manifest themselves in our society in keeping with the pronounced and deep differences between the genders. So I just thought that makes an interesting initial, what would you call it, real world demonstration. So, okay, so about 2 months ago, I made these videos. I did it because I was trying to articulate my concerns for a variety of reasons. I've been keeping an eye on political correctness for a long time, and I was also very upset with the Human Resources and Equity Department's decision to make anti-racism, so-called anti-racism and anti-bias training mandatory for their staff, which I regard as an unacceptable intrusion into their staff's right to their political opinion, as well as noting that there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that mandatory anti-racism and anti-bias training has the impact that is claimed. In fact, the empirical evidence suggests quite the contrary. When you mandate that sort of thing, you actually make people more prejudiced. It's also based on what I would say is a rather pernicious form of pseudoscience that's been promoted by social psychologists, a group that I have a fair bit of trouble with, and that's been transformed into a kind of educational fascism that has no grounding whatsoever in the empirical literature. Now, what happened as a consequence of making these videos was really quite unexpected to me. We've been trying to keep count. There's been 140 print articles published about this, whatever this is, in the last 2 months, and then dozens and dozens of YouTube videos and television interviews and radio interviews and demonstrations. Millions of people have been tuning into this online. And so obviously something's up, and I can tell you that what's up isn't only a discussion about Bill C-16 and about gendered pronouns. You know, sometimes when you're having a debate, a discussion with someone that you love, and you're having a little argument about something, like who's going to do the dishes or something like that, or, and you know how especially if you haven't been getting along very well with that person, you know how the discussion starts with something specific, and then you start trading all the things that it might be about until you're arguing about, you know, the way that you behaved on your third date, you know, 10 years ago, and the whole underlying unresolved chaos of your relationship emerges through the little portal that was defined by the argument. You know, well, that's what this is about. So what the hell is going on here exactly, and why are we damn near at each other's throats? Look at what happened in the United States a week and a half ago. There's some things to talk about here, and I started to try to talk about them, and I would say that my freedom to do so was rapidly infringed upon. My career was put at risk, and I find this absolutely unacceptable because I am trying to sort this out. And believe me, you know what you call people you can't talk to? Enemies. And if we want to divide our society into armed camps of enmity, all we have to do is keep doing what we're doing. And I would recommend that we don't do this. I've studied authoritarianism for a very long time. I know what happens when things get out of control, and it can happen extraordinarily rapidly. And I would say we're on the cusp of that. And so we need to start talking and listening. And when you talk, it doesn't mean you're right, it doesn't mean you're correct, right? It means you're trying to articulate and formulate your thoughts like the boneheaded moron that you are. And you're going to stumble around idiotically, because what the hell do you know? You're full of biases, and you're ignorant, and you can't speak very well, and you're over emotional, and you know, you've got just problems that you can hardly even imagine that are interfering with your ability to state something clear. And so what you do is you do your best to say what you mean, and then you listen to other people tell you why you're a blithering idiot, and hopefully you can correct yourself to some degree as a consequence of listening to them. And you see, that's what free speech is about, because you have to, it isn't just that people can organize themselves and their societies by thinking. You can't do that because there's only one of you. What you have to do is you have to articulate your thoughts in a public forum so that other people can attack you, and hopefully in a corrective manner. And then you want to step back a little bit and think, okay, well, I was a little arrogant there, and I was a little over emotional there, and I didn't get that quite right, and maybe I'm outright biased on that front. And you want to correct what you say, because then you correct how you are, and then you correct how you act in life, and then you correct your society. And to the degree that we limit freedom of expression, we put all of that at risk. I'm a clinical psychologist, and one of the things, there's two things that we kind of know about why clinical psychology works, and one is that people get stronger if they voluntarily expose themselves to things they're afraid of and that they're disgusted by. It's a hallmark of clinical psychotherapy, and I would say it's also the defining characteristic of appropriate human adaptation, right? Is that you have to confront the chaotic things that you don't understand and then learn to master them and articulate them. And the other is that clinical psychotherapy works because people can come, say, into my office, and they can say whatever they have to say, no matter how incoherent it is, or how psychotic it is, or how overbearing it is, or confused or jumbled. And sometimes it takes my clients months or years of continual conversation just to start to untie the hundreds of thousands of knots that have been badly tied in their minds. So, and that's partly why I don't believe that freedom of speech is just another value. I think that's preposterous. I think that if you claim that, then you know nothing about Western civilization and history. Freedom of speech is not just another principle. It's the mechanism by which we keep our psyches and our societies organized, and we have to be unbelievably careful about infringing upon that, because we're infringing upon the process by which we keep chaos and order balanced, and if chaos and order go out of balance, then all hell breaks loose, and the situation is not good. And we've seen that happen many times in the 20th century, right? Since the late 1800s, our societies, Western societies, have been careening madly between the hyper-repressive order of the radical right and the absolute devouring chaos of the radical left. We've become unmoored, we've lost our bearings, and the only thing that can possibly save us from continuing to do exactly that is the dialogue of exactly the sort that I'm describing at the moment, and what we're attempting to do today in this forum. Thank God the university agreed to have this debate. Because there's things to talk about, and if we don't talk about them, then we're going to fight. Well, what is this all about? I can list you some of the things that it's about. It's about inclusion versus bigotry and prejudice, right? It's about the left wing versus the right wing. It's about who's free to choose their language, and what elements of respect that you're due to people who are different than you, say with regards to pronoun use or chosen names. It's about whether the subjective or the objective is going to take precedence, because implicit in Bill C-16, and I'm telling you, there's an assault on the idea of objectivity itself, an assault on the idea of biology itself. And if the university thinks that the sciences are going to be immune from the ideological doctrine that's embedded in these pieces of legislation, they better think again, because there is trouble coming. I know that OISE already has an anti-psychiatry program, and we noticed that Ken Zucker got hounded out of his job just a few years ago, even though he was an entirely credible scientist and clinician. So it's about constructionism, social constructionism, versus positivism, versus pragmatism. And there's a mother versus father thing going on here too, and you kind of saw that with Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. I would say that was the overprotective, devouring mother versus the tyrannical father, which is that's not a good narrative from a mythological perspective. It's about also the adversarial spirit, I would say, versus the logos. That's at the deepest possible level of analysis, and the adversarial spirit is the spirit that claims what I think right now is correct above all else, and I have nothing whatsoever to learn, versus the logos. And the logos is a very complex idea, and maybe the deepest idea of humanity, I would say, certainly the deepest idea of Western civilization, and that's that the proper citizen is the person who embodies truth in speech and attempts to act it out. And that also includes listening, because listening is part of communicative intent. And I think at the moment that we're embroiled in a war on every single one of those dimensions, and several others that I haven't had time to list. And the evidence that we're in that sort of war is precisely the fact that this has attracted so much attention. I mean, I just sat in my bloody office at home and threw up a couple of amateurish videos, more or less attempting to articulate my feelings about a couple of policies, and it's like all hell broke loose. And why? Well, because that hell is right underneath the surface.
If you like this video, I recommend you to read this book. Get the book, link in the description below.